Decade after a US-led coalition went into Iraq to remove Saddam Hussein, the country seems to be back on the verge of another war. This time, the Baghdad government is facing a threat from hardline Sunni Islamists who have promised to head for the capital, Baghdad. Sky's Lisa Holland has this special report.
Iraq now faces the biggest threat to the sovereignty and to the integrity of this country.
I know the President of the United States is prepared to make key decisions.
Iraq is facing the prospect of complete disintegration. In this special report, we'll examine how that's happened and whether this is the beginning of the end for Iraq. It's just over 11 years since shock and awe, the US-led blitz of the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. The speed with which Iraq fell was astonishing. It belied the years of turmoil that lay ahead. The Sunni leader, Saddam Hussein, head of the socialist Ba'ath Party, had ruled the country with a rod of iron since 1979. Saddam, which means he who confronts, was a violent dictator who used fear and brutality to stay in power. During the 1980s, he used chemical weapons against his enemies, including gassing the Kurdish town of Halabja. But it was his alleged chemical weapons program which put him in the sights of the West, leading Britain and America to join forces with a coalition of the willing to invade Iraq in March 2003.
The people of the United States and our friends and allies will not live at the mercy of an outlaw regime that threatens the peace with weapons of mass murder. We will meet that threat now with our Army, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard and Marines.
When Iraqis pulled down Saddam Hussein's statue in the heart of Baghdad, it looked like the country was facing a bright new democratic future. US and British forces invaded from the south. They were welcomed by the largely Shia majority after their years of suppression. But that optimism gradually gave way to despair as insurgent groups, mainly drawn from embittered Sunnis, dismissed Ba'ath army officers and supporters of the former regime, began an increasingly bloody campaign of bomb attacks. The insurgents, with al-Qaeda in Iraq amongst the most violent, targeted civilians as well as security forces, at times killing hundreds of people in one day. The conflict descended into sectarian warfare, reaching a peak in 2006 and 2007 when Shia militant groups struck back with a campaign of kidnappings and killings. The transfer of power to an interim government led by Shia Nouri al-Maliki failed to stem the violence, but a surge of American troops together with co-opted moderate Sunnis did. But by 2011, US troops had finally been withdrawn, and by 2013, the violence had gathered pace once more.
What we saw from 2010 onwards, with the results of the election then, was Maliki clinging to power and basically manipulating both politics and the judicial system to cement his position. Now that has continued, and what we've also seen over the last 3 or 4 years is him thoroughly alienating the Sunnis, both through politics, through the judicial system, through putting Sunni leaders up for legal process, and also by using excessive violence against the Sunnis, particularly when he cracked down on the Sunni protest camps last year. So in a sense, I'm afraid to say that over recent years, Prime Minister Maliki seems to be the author of Iraq's misfortune.
Into the fray and now threatening the very existence of the country of Iraq is the extremist Islamist group called ISIS, also known as ISIL, or the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. After a failed merger with Al-Qaeda in Syria, Al-Qaeda in Iraq renamed itself ISIS, reflecting its ambitions and expansion into Syria's civil war. But the extremist tactics of ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has forced a split, even with Al-Qaeda.
Their goal is to establish a caliphate in the region, namely Iraq and the Levant, Syria and Lebanon, but al-Baghdadi has also announced that he would like to attack Iran, and that would be the game changer. They are, as of now, one of the strongest jihadist groups in the world, and they'll get more people joining because of the fact that they're gaining victories. And in the jihadist world, being the strongest is usually being the one you join.
In a lightning strike in December last year, ISIS seized control of the Iraqi cities of Fallujah and Ramadi, the two major Sunni strongholds of western Anbar province. Iraq's security forces made some inroads against them, but without any apparent strategy, either to retake the cities or to win back their populations. Then, over the last week, the group made an astonishing push south through other Sunni areas towards the capital. These pictures show ISIS fighters triumphant in Mosul, waving the black and white flag of their desired Islamic State. This map gives you a sense of the areas now under ISIS control. Some of it remains contested, but it's a vast area which extends into Syria right down to Fallujah. ISIS has seized parts of Nineveh province, the biggest prize, Iraq's second city of Mosul. From there, the group's been heading south towards Baiji, Tikrit and Samarra. There have also been battles in Jalaula and Saudiya, smaller towns towards the Iranian border. They've now reportedly fallen to the Sunni extremists, along with several villages around the Himreen Mountains, after government troops abandoned their positions.
It is incredible, and after effectively $15 billion spent by the US to train the army, provide them with the best equipment, it is problematic to see how quickly the soldiers are running away for their lives. I think the issue is that they think that, and rightly so, if ISIS soldiers get their hands on them, they will die in very, very tough conditions and torture. ISIS has a reputation of going after Shias strongly and also not stopping at any torture or any violence against them. So there's the fear factor that is huge at this point.
These are the kinds of images which give the Americans nightmares. Islamist fighters roaming around a base near Tikrit. It was once the headquarters of US forces in northern Iraq. The Iraqi Air Force has responded by bombing ISIS positions close to Mosul and Tikrit. But there is a real sense now that the security forces are on the back foot. These pictures appear to show Iraqi army tanks captured by rebels. These tanks are Iraqi Prime Minister Maliki's tanks, says this man. The international community is deeply alarmed.
Iraq now faces the biggest threat to the sovereignty and to the integrity of this country that it has faced for a number of years. The United Nations and the Security Council are watching very carefully and with great concern the situation in this country.
In Baghdad, there's now a real sense of apprehension, even panic over the march of the Islamists. Residents are stockpiling food, and many are trying to leave the city to avoid fighting which may lie ahead.
I won't tell you what I feel, but I will tell you what the Iraqis feel in the capital. They are afraid, and many of the streets are really empty, and it's not as crowded as it used to be.
But the spectre of full-blown civil war looms large. In a rare intervention, Iraq's most senior Shiite cleric, the Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, speaking in the holy city of Karbala, urged his followers to take up arms. And they appear to be heeding the message. Volunteers are filmed at an army recruitment centre, showing their readiness to join Iraq's security forces. This man says he is ready to serve his country and defeat ISIS fighters. We will go to Mosul, God willing, to kill and defeat them. In fear of fighting and the breakup of their country, up to 500,000 people are thought to have fled from Mosul alone. It is a humanitarian crisis the West cannot ignore. But whilst America insists it won't send troops back to Iraq, it hasn't ruled out intervention in support of the Iraqi army.
We are deeply concerned about what is happening in Iraq, and we are not concerned and waiting. We are providing assistance. We are in direct touch with Prime Minister Maliki, with leaders at the top level. I've just completed phone calls now with people in Iraq, and I know the President of the United States is prepared to make key decisions in short order, and as he made clear earlier, options are on the table right now, and at the appropriate time, I'm sure you'll hear from the President.
Symbolically destroying Iraqi passports, ISIS fighters believe they have taken Iraq to the brink of destruction. But it isn't that straightforward. For one, Iraq's Shia neighbour Iran won't let that happen.
This is going to end into a violent civil war. There's so much antagonization between the Sunnis and the Shias that there's no way of going back, and people have no choice than to fight off. But the issue is much more on a regional scale. If ISIS were to control even large portions of Iraq, they would have the wherewithal of attacking other countries, namely Syria, Lebanon, or even Iran. Now the question is how Iran is going to react to that change into the chessboard. If Iran is attacked on its own soil by ISIS fighters, something that never happened in the past, then that would be a game changer, and Iran would have to get involved, namely even sending Revolutionary Guards troops to Iraq. And that will change the whole dynamics of the Middle East.
Even if the fighters of ISIS fail to reach Baghdad, they have already dramatically deepened the fault lines which exist between Sunnis and Shias across the Middle East. And that in itself is a major leap towards their goal of an Islamic state and a haven for those following their extremist mantra.